I think the important thing to note about this and these binders is that we used to change our binders every few months because that's when we need to change them. So these represent the overdose records that we've printed and signed off on. So we can see that we have August 2016 until November, so there's a few months span there. We've got June until August, there's a few months there. But then picking up shortly after this, we've got like January, February, March, April, May, June, July, which are all solo months because the volume of overdoses just picked up so hard and so fast that then we were going through the binders a lot faster.
People are dying of drug overdoses in unprecedented numbers, and most of those deaths are caused by what we call opioid drugs. These are a class of drugs that include heroin, morphine. They include some legal drugs and illegal drugs. Most of the deaths occurring now are because we have a contamination of the illegal drug supply with a drug called fentanyl.
Join me here. Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen? America's public enemy number one is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
Tonight, we have asked him to talk about the topic on which he has been very active about drug policy, and in particular, the opioids crisis. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Dan K. Moran.
My conclusion is the war on drugs has been a war on people. After 50 years of the war on drugs, it's a colossal policy failure. John Ehrlichman was a domestic advisor for President Richard Nixon in 1970.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
He was involved in the Watergate scandal and ended up going to jail. And he was interviewed in 1994 and offered the following. The war on drugs was created as a particular political policy to deal with hippies and blacks, Nixon's political enemies. And that was their strategy. And it worked.
Everything is worse. More violence, more drugs, more use, more disease spread. There's not one data point that's better.
Police department, search warrant, open the door!
When you strip away all the issues about the drug wars, it's really a global economic enterprise of staggering proportions. Product is grown overseas in vast amounts, shipped in vast amounts, distributed to almost every street corner in the United States, Canada, and elsewhere around the world. Somebody once said to me, well, if you want to get a dirty nuclear bomb into the United States, you just wrap it in cocaine for safekeeping.
And then all the cash transactions of $5, $10, $20, $50 are all money laundered back through very sophisticated financial operations and total in the billions of dollars. That's not counting criminal justice system, law enforcement, prisons, healthcare, AIDS, hepatitis, just buying the drugs. It's a colossal enterprise. So we've had a policy that's been not working and destroying our culture and society from the inside. It's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of life and death every hour of every day in every part of North America and large parts of the world. It's a global issue.
Danny's photo album. This is more sort of the older Danny that I put together. This is Danny the day he graduated from culinary school. He went to the Art Institute of Vancouver, and he, in spite of the fact that he was using, he did manage to graduate from culinary arts, and he worked in some of the best restaurants here in Edmonton. And this is like little Danny with his siblings. Yeah, he was always kind of a quirky kid. He when he was 3, he wanted a cactus for his birthday. And when he was 8, or 7 or 8, he wanted gold panning equipment. He thought he'd find the riches in the Saskatchewan River. Our youngest son, Danny, first came out and told us that he was addicted to opioids, to heroin, then trying to help him. And eventually he did reach recovery for about 1.5 years, but like so many people in recovery, he had a relapse and he died actually today is the anniversary, 4 years ago today, is when he died from accidental fentanyl poisoning. We often think that people who use are selfish. They only think about themselves, and they don't care about the people who love them, but they do. They deeply, deeply care, and they feel guilty. Danny carried an enormous amount of guilt because he knew he hurt the people he loved. His boyfriend left him because of his use. And, he hurt us. And he had an overdrawn account of regrets because of that.
We're absolutely dealing with a crisis. The biggest thing is to acknowledge the scope of the crisis and put resources in an evidence-based way into the things that are needed.
Well, there's lots of drug crises. We've had an alcohol crisis. There's a tobacco crisis. There's a lot of crises at the same time. Why particularly opioids? Because they're readily available, because there's a huge profit margin.
Opioids are available both legally and illegally. So opioids are also used for pain management in North America.
I myself would not take an opioid. I've seen too much in my own practice as a pharmacist to know better.
The likelihood of becoming addicted to an opioid is much stronger than any other substance that we know.
And it works in the brain, and it works very, very quickly. It sits in the receptors in the brain that stimulate euphoria, and that's why people use it.
And what we know now is that when you give people opioids like morphine or OxyContin, the brain changes. It changes very quickly to downregulate the pain fibers because you have all this opioid sloshing around. And you can actually get something called hyperalgesia, where you feel more pain because of the opioids, and then you have to go up on the opioid dose, which leads to more side effects and tolerance and withdrawal if you stop, and ultimately addiction.
I just had a kidney stone, and I was given a narcotic. To be honest, it relieved the pain. But, to take it for a few days and then not take it, I think I actually experienced a little bit of withdrawal.
Opiate withdrawal and the effects of opiate withdrawal on the body are very, very tough. So it's been described to me as, imagine the worst flu you've ever had and multiply that by 10.
If they cut people off, then people may turn to the illegal market. And that's where the risk then comes of exposure to fentanyl and other contaminants in the illegal drug supply that could cause death.
Fentanyl is 100 or more times powerful than morphine, so that what's called the margin of safety is much smaller, much narrower than, let's say, heroin.
It's odorless, colorless, tasteless. It can be in anything, and there's no way that we know it's in there. As little as 1 or 2 grains of salt that size could put you or I into overdose.
Because we're dealing with a much, much more powerful drug, that is where the problem arises.
It used to be that a young person might, some party somewhere, go, oh, my friend's got some cocaine, well, maybe I'll try it. And they might be okay. They might try it once, might be great, might not be great, but they probably wouldn't die. And now we don't know.
The majority of fentanyl and its analogs that we have intercepted in the Canada Border Services Agency is coming from China.
Because it's much more powerful, it's easier to import because much smaller quantities can go a long way in the illegal drug market.
In June 2016, A package was intercepted at the Vancouver International Mail Center, being declared as printer cartridges. It was found later that it was 1,000 grams of carfentanil. And many reports have shown that 1,000 grams of carfentanil could potentially yield 50 million lethal dosages.
When they're made in an illicit lab, for example, it's not like it's a reputable pharmaceutical firm where quality standards are in place all the way down the production line. So there can be great variability between tablets.
So even though dealers may not intend to provide a substance that will kill their customers, they don't have quality control when they manufacture the drugs for sale, and tiny, tiny quantities of fentanyl can be lethal.
There's very little margin of safety with fentanyl, and because of the cheapness and availability of this killing drug, this murderous drug, a lot of people are dying.
This is a crash kit check. So right now we're checking for the amount of medications we have in our crash kits. We want to make sure we're ready with the right number of Narcan, because we could get overdoses like right away. We could even have somebody banging on the window like any time starting now. We just want to make sure that this is the first thing we do, is that our crash kits are ready to go. This is an artificial airway. So if somebody's not breathing during an overdose, we're going to tip them to the floor and tilt their head back, open their mouth, and put one of these in, so that once we open up the airway to push air in, we can secure it with one of these guys. So we want to make sure we have at least 2 of each size. This is all part of the morning crash kit checks. And they're very well utilized, our crash kits. We use them multiple times a day. Yeah, it's not uncommon for us to have multiple at one time. So yeah, I think we were talking earlier about the average used to be 2 overdoses per day, and we're now at 7 overdoses per day as our average, but that number fluctuates from day to day. Inside is a supervised injection site, so the main intent of that is that people who are going to be injecting or using drugs, they can do it with others around them. So if something happens, like an overdose or some kind of injection-related emergency, help is right there.
Supervised consumption facilities, since we're talking about saving lives, the number of overdose deaths, not overdoses, but overdose deaths in supervised consumption facilities is 0. That 0 means none. And if our goal is to save lives, they clearly do.
Unless we're going to ignore the suffering of people at every level of society, why would we want to ignore it at the level of people who are addicted to drugs? And so harm reduction, to me, is not controversial. What is controversial is that it is controversial.
Right now we're in the injection room, so this is the only place here where injections can actually happen. So we have 13 booths for that purpose. So typically people will come in, they'll register at their front desk, and then once a booth opens up, we'll go to the door and we'll call them in. They can come here and grab all of their own supplies. And I think an important part of this is that they can grab as much as they need. So the person would typically come and grab one of these trays. For all injections, we encourage people to use alcohol swabs to clean the skin. Waters, so sterile waters, people aren't using like toilet water, tap water, puddle water. Needles, the typical needle someone's gonna use is a 1 cc needle here. We have candles and matches, because some drugs have to be broken down with a bit of heat, like heroin. You need a bit of heat to break that down. This is really for breaking down crack cocaine. So we have this acid for them to do that with. This is an important one too. So these are cookers. These are sterile little tools that people can use to prepare their drugs in. So this is different than a spoon that somebody might carry and reuse, which can just increase their risk of infection. But also if they're sharing spoons, then the risk of hepatitis C transmission or other infectious diseases goes up. And then once they're in their booth, they can either call us if they need help, like if they need help injecting or they need help figuring, I don't know, their supplies or whatever, then they can just call us over, we'll go help. But what we also do is we just pace around the room.
Places like Insight, other supervised injection sites are going to serve a certain population. But we are overly focusing on those populations when we are trying to think of strategies to help. We have got to deal with the tradesperson or the person who got hooked on drugs because they went to a party with their friends when they were 19.
I've never seen anything like this in my career. We've had instances where there was a slight increase in overdose deaths, for example, but that was very, very minor compared to what we're seeing now.
I can tell you in one day alone, at a peak time, I responded to 22 separate overdoses in one shift. And that's a lot of calls.
It's really hard to convince people out there in the sort of regular world that it's going to touch their lives. That, you know, they have this sort of maybe this impression that it's people that are hardcore drug users on the street. And that's not the case.
It's every community, every socioeconomic strata, from the very poor to the very rich, across races, across gender.
The number of people that are dying in British Columbia alone, about 100 people dying per month, and the worst months more like 150. It's a terrible crisis. Young people in the prime of their lives. We don't have anything like this in BC. It's the worst public health emergency we've had.
People need to wake up. Where's our compassion? I mean, all these people are dying, have families. They have brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers.
Every parent needs to talk to their kid about this, because one experiment with this drug can lead to a child's death.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Ben Corey, and this is my story.
He always had tons of friends around him, and he was a gifted athlete. By the time he was 5, he was playing baseball and soccer, and so he always had lots of teammates, and kids just gravitated to him. He was just a charming, lovely, very human kid. But he was also shy, which, as we realized later, was more of a problem than we thought. He was 13, and we got a call from the school that they had to call an ambulance, and he was outside.
Oh, he called me first.
Right, he called you.
On my cell phone, and I was just about to go into a meeting, and he said, Dad, I took ecstasy and I don't feel well.
I guess we treated it like a bizarre one-off.
Yeah.
You know, it was a kind of experimental, but at the time, there was no other indication that there was a problem, so we treated it like that.
And he did say to us at one point that he wanted to experience all of high school, and kind of thought, well, that's weird, a weird thing to say, but what he meant was that there was partying and other things that he wanted to try.
We don't know exactly when Ben started using OxyContin and fentanyl, but that was a game changer for sure.
At first, the teachers were concerned, and because they cared about him, and the vice principal and the counselors, there was a lot of care and compassion there at first. And then as things got worse and worse, they just wanted some distance.
People don't understand much about addiction. They don't understand that this is a chronic health condition.
And if you ask anybody, not what was wrong with their addiction, but what was right about it. What did they like about it? They'll say, it gave me pleasure. They'll say, it made me numb. They'll say, it reduced anxiety. They'll say, it gave me a sense of control. But then you say, well, why did you have to be numb? Because you were in pain.
When I didn't have my pills in the morning, I felt the most hopeless and fearful of where my life had actually taken me. And I would lie on my bed thinking about where I went wrong and wishing I could just close my eyes and drift off into death. But I would always find a way to get high and live another day.
Nobody said to us, your son may be addicted or dealing with addiction. Nobody ever said that. And we saw, as we've said, counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists and lots of people who said that they offered a solution, and some pretty wacky, things. We try them all because we were so desperate.
Finally, thanks to my higher power for your patience, love, and compassion. Thank you.
The challenging thing with opioid addiction is it's a chronic relapsing condition. There's no cure for it. You will have it for your whole life. similar to other chronic conditions like diabetes. And we know that people are very likely to relapse even if they've been successful in treatment for a period of time. And unfortunately, people who relapse are at higher risk of death than others because they've lost their tolerance to opioids after they've gotten off them. So someone who's a chronic heroin user that gets onto substitution therapy and relapses, if they take the same dose of heroin they took before they were treated, they are now at much higher risk of death.
The last year before he died, we resuscitated him half a dozen times.
Overdoses are a very frightening call to see for a first time, especially if you're not a healthcare professional. They're not breathing. Quite often they're blue because of the lack of oxygen.
Both the oxygen dropping in their blood and then their heart stopping both affect their brain function.
Their brain is still trying to breathe, so it looks like they're gasping, but clinically they look dead.
It's bad. It's bad. I've never really understood the power of an overdose, and then, like I said, I've been doing this for a long, long time until I saw it myself, and I injected a patient with Narcan and actually brought him back.
They might receive a medication, naloxone, which will compete with this substance at the breathing center, and they'll start breathing again.
That's a bit of an amazing thing to see, because when you walk in, they look like they're dead.
All of a sudden, he wakes up from the steps, he just goes, and he sits up off the steps with his arms like this. And the color came back into his face, and I was shocked. I was just like, I can't believe that this guy's alive.
They've been through a pretty bad situation. They haven't been breathing, so some brain cells have been affected, so they're not thinking too clearly.
So when I say I learned about the power of addiction at that moment, the first thing he said to me after I injected him with the Narcan and he woke up from a fatal overdose, perhaps, right, was he called me a name and he said, "You ruined my fix." I think about that. I think about the power of that statement, where you just saved somebody's life and he was mad at you about it. But it doesn't end there. So this was a Monday night. I was off on Tuesday, only to come in on Wednesday morning to be told that he overdosed and died 24 hours later on Tuesday evening. Think about it. Yeah. Right? So there it is, you know? That's it. That's addiction in a nutshell for me. And I've been doing this for a long time, and it was probably, like I said, 10 years into my practice here where I never had that look at addiction where I was just like, that's what it is. That's what it is. So, and the guy is dead today. He's dead today. He overdosed and died.
He had 9 fentanyl overdoses in that year. And as Jill said, we found him unconscious 6 times. You're just really not, you're not supposed to do CPR on your own kid. Not just once, but 6 times.
In that last fentanyl overdose, I think he just thought he could take the dose that he'd been taking when he'd been using a lot.
Evidently what had happened was he went out to have a smoke on the deck sometime in the night and died there. And I didn't even know he was home. I had a naloxone kit sitting right on the bedside table, and people think naloxone kits are the answer. Well, you gotta be right there with that naloxone kit right at that moment when that person is having their last breath. Addiction is one of those diseases, and you can have the best treatment in the world, and you're still gonna lose people.
Here you go, my dear. Thank you.
I feel so tired from the last couple of days. I can't even explain it. And my hand.
Naloxone can save your life. And for those individuals that survive but do not die, they usually end up with some form of fairly significant brain injury. It's as bad a brain injury as if you've been in a car accident, had a major fall. It affects your personality, your cognitive functions, your ability to care for yourself.
Park you so you can see your mom come. Okay, can you lock your brakes, please?
I'm Norma, and this is Tracy. She's my daughter. She was just a great equestrian and quite a competitor. Did very well in school, honor roll, very much connected in the community. So she was just, like a regular kid who loved doing and being involved and was good fun. When she was maybe 15, she had endometriosis really bad. At that time, doctors pretty freely gave out morphine or something like that for pain.
The other concern that we've had in North America is the overprescribing of prescription opioids by physicians. Think about morphine, you think about OxyContin, which is in pill form, and certainly in the last number of years in Canada and the United States, there has been overprescribing of opioids for conditions for which it probably should not be prescribed, particularly chronic pain.
I'll never forget, I'm going, wow, this is morphine. That's what the doctor actually gave you, morphine? And when she was about 16 and 17, that's what she would knock herself out with the painkillers that he would give her.
So the opioid crisis is not just an accident. It's also, and it's not just a product of fentanyl, it's also a result of poor medical practice and unscrupulous pharmaceutical practice, for which nobody has gone to jail, by the way.
There was a big push between 1998 and 2002 that every health professional who's around then knows about, which was to treat pain as the fifth vital sign.
Physicians are reading in medical journals that we're undertreating pain. In some cases, the pharmaceutical industry developed textbooks to be used for medical students treating about pain.
There's only 4 basic medicines to treat pain: aspirin, Tylenol, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, Motrin, Aleve, narcotics.
And then, of course, the pharmaceutical companies came in with OxyContin and the promotion of these drugs as safe and not addictive, paying physicians to be, on speakers bureaus and promoting, pain as the fifth vital sign, and that we need to do a much better job treating pain. That was really an intervention by corporations in the healthcare system that, really led to what we call iatrogenic, or caused by the healthcare system, addiction.
As she got older, I did not know that she was going to other doctors getting more. By the time she was 20, she was heavily into prescription pills. As a parent, you just sort of try as hard as you can to help. Sometimes helping is enabling, and I know that happened. Just trying to keep her off the streets. She got off the pills 10 or 12 years ago into hard drugs. We tried to break the constant drug use. And finally, with the help of a doctor, Tracy was able to, I'm going to say, pretty much break clean. She was in Calgary with her boyfriend and 3 girlfriends. One of the girls' boyfriends, who was very heavily into drugs, brought Stampede Special. What she had inhaled was just enough to bring on a massive heart attack. When the ambulance got there, they brought her back right away. And they had said, the report said she was in full code for more than 3 minutes. And they were doing an amazing job of keeping her alive. Yeah, that was... She has anoxic brain injury. What Tracy's experiencing is just getting by day to day. That's all. A person who's addicted, I mean, to a drug, they're just ordinary people. We didn't get up this morning saying we were going to be, have something horrible happen to us. They're just ordinary people, and they're dying from horrendous drugs, and we have no way to stop it. And are we doing enough to stop it? I don't think so.
The war on drugs has been a terrible failure. We are reaping what we've sown.
You have the historical war on drugs and the moralistic values, and politicians very hesitant to invest in the things that need to be done.
The system needs a major overhaul. The system is not even broken. It's so dysfunctional and so counterproductive that we have the opposite results to what we actually want.
That's where our forum submission comes in through the website. But what is most powerful here is the images of these are our kids. Moms Stop the Harm, it's a network. It's an advocacy group of families that have been affected by the opioid crisis. What our aim is to change drug policy, change it away from a focus on criminal justice and blame the person to actually seeing it as what it is. It's a health issue. Yeah, I see you. Yeah, and there's Leslie. Hey, you guys are here. That's awesome. I thought we could have a chat about our event in Victoria. Our group, one of the aims right now is to work towards decriminalization of personal possession of drugs. If you want to take away stigma of substance use, you have to take away the criminalization of it. It's just fundamental. Okay, love you. Bye. Bye. We look a lot at the HIV/AIDS crisis to learn from the advocacy in those years, because that was very much, again, fraught with stigma, and there were slow public responses, and numbers were really rising. So we had an initiative that we called Do Something, Prime Minister. We had our members send photos of their children to the Prime Minister and write on the photo, on the envelope, "Do something, Prime Minister," with messages like, "People are dying, we need actions from the government." And he must have received about 500 photos. We want to change legislation. This is something we are pushing really hard for.
You never lose votes by being tough on crime. You might lose votes if you decide to be compassionate to those that experience the greatest traumas in our society.
So what we do know is that if you look at North America, at least 60% of people coming into prison have a substance use disorder. And if you include the crime related to substance use, that number goes up to 80%.
We're not going to arrest our way out of this. Prohibition's not working. The war on drugs does not work. We need to rethink, we need to reset.
If I ran the show right now, I would, like Portugal, I would decriminalize any drug.
Portugal being a good example where they've decriminalized the use of drugs and they put a huge emphasis into addiction treatment and recovery. And, they have among the lowest problems related to drugs in the entire European Union, where they used to have one of the worst. And it's been a boon for taxpayers in terms of saving money, and then in terms of public health and safety, things are much better. So we need a total rethink of where we're going with this.
I would call upon the federal government to be bold. We are dealing with a crisis here. People are dying every day. This shouldn't be about ideology. It should be about what the data shows us. And it tells us that if we were to right now decriminalize possession of all illegal drugs, we could reduce the risk that people might die from overdoses.
So it requires courage on the part of political leaders. It requires humanity and compassion on the part of society. And I actually think that if we employ those, not only will we benefit the people that's most needed, I think it would benefit, I think we'd just be in a better world if we adapted those policies and those approaches.
It's not really a drug problem when you think about it. It really is a problem with people learning to manage how to cope and manage and deal with boredom and curiosity, but also deal with trauma and stress and depression and anxiety and isolation and those sorts of things. And there are things that we can do that really help with all of those.
I think we have to make it okay for people to say that, to walk into their physician's office and say, I've had trauma in my life. It may be sexual abuse. It could be that I was bullied as a kid when I was a kid. It could be that I had a grandmother who I was close to died when I was 5 and I've never really gotten over it. They need to be able to feel comfortable saying that rather than being judged.
And since trauma of various degrees and various forms is absolutely almost universal throughout this society, this is a highly addicted society.
I think we help society understand what addiction is, that it is a disease, that it is an obsession of the mind, that kids, these are not bad kids. They appear to be bad, and they may do bad things, but it's because they're sick.
I think we can do something about this. I think we need to invest money in prevention now, and I think it will make a difference, but don't expect us to change the numbers next year or the year after that.
It's been well measured and well studied for a long time that for every $1 invested in substance abuse treatment, you save $7 to $10 in societal expenses. And that's on the measurement is the expenses that can be measured. It doesn't measure the expenses, the suffering that you can't measure.
Hey, sweetie, how are you? Dad, you've been waiting. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
I would encourage people to think seriously, what can they do and who can they band together with in their community, other parents, clubs or organizations are a part of all of that.
Okay. I need to go home.
You're coming home. Yeah,
I'm not
it's okay.
feeling
Okay,
good.
it's okay. Okay, just.
I don't have
It's okay. We'll come back. Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. We're gonna go see Dr. Bowling.
I have to go right now.
Oh, you're okay. I'm gonna go dump this.
Okay, we'll go.
Yeah, and then we're
Thank
gonna
you.
go. Okay. No worrying. No worrying allowed.
No.
Everyone's part of this. There are certainly opportunities to support the work we're doing. People may want to volunteer and help, but I think the average person, just by beginning to talk about addiction in a different way amongst their family and friends, that's going to begin to reduce the stigma and really help us in this crisis.
I think the best way to address this stigma issue is one is education, but we also have to look at it compassionately and from a different lens.
Oh. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Now turn.
The average person needs to have a discussion. You need to talk to your children about it. It shouldn't be a hidden topic. You know, it won't happen here.
Forward a little bit for you. Hope is an interesting word. Hope is there hope for something happening in the future? Well, something can always happen in the future, but I think there's something much stronger than hope. There's possibility. And possibility exists in the present moment. So people can wake up in the present moment. They don't have to hope, they can just wake up. That's a possibility that's with us right now. So, yeah, there's hope in the sense that we can imagine that things will be better in the future, but in the meanwhile, let's look at what's possible right now.